think a great life is using your strengths, understanding what it is you were put on this earth to do, okay? Understanding what it is that makes you unique and what allows, and what is the truest expression of who you are. Doing that persistently in the service of something larger than yourself. I worked on a number of political campaigns, and most of them lost. And so my future as a political operative and strategist was looking somewhat dim. And I had the good fortune of being a very fast typist. And as a fast typist, I was called on to write a few things, and it turned out I was reasonably good at that, and then became basically a speechwriter, writing for a few politicians, a cabinet secretary, and then chief speechwriter for Vice President Gore during 95, 96, and 97. One of the reasons that I left politics, and one of the reasons I left writing for other people, is because there was that voice that wasn't being heard. I was doing some amount of writing on my own on the side, but in this very demanding job, that was difficult. And I felt like if I stayed around writing for other people, eventually that voice, that internal voice, would be suffocated. What worries me a little bit about some of the younger folks, say folks in their 20s, is that they've been so indoctrinated in a school system that's focused on right answers and pleasing authority figures that they have, in some ways, not even allowed their intrinsic motivation to blossom. When I talk to college classes, it's always a little bit disturbing because I find that I have this sea of faces looking at me saying, is this going to be on the test? We have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. Right now, they all seem headed for right-brain careers. My 9-year-old daughter wants to be a novelist, my 7-year-old daughter wants to be an art teacher, and my 3-year-old son wants to operate his own digger truck. So, I want my kids, I think I want everybody to find out what it is that they do out of a sense of enjoyment and challenge. Not for the external rewards, okay, forget about that. Do what you do because you like it, because it's fun, because it's interesting, because it's challenging, because it's meaningful. People who are intrinsically motivated, they do just fine. They really do just fine, okay? It's the folks I worry about are the folks who are always chasing these kind of external rewards, external validations. I think over time, they start to wonder what their life is all about, and they have huge regrets.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks so much. Thanks. Well, thank you. Thank you for that very warm welcome. One of the things about my past, which I often don't reveal, is that in a former life I worked as a political speechwriter. And because of that, people sometimes ask me, Dan, what makes a good speech? And I've thought about that question quite a bit over the years. And I've discovered that good speeches in general have 3 key elements. 3 key elements to a good speech: brevity, levity, and repetition. Let me say that again. Brevity, levity, and repetition. So I promise to be reasonably brief. I promise not to be too severe and serious. And I promise you, and I guarantee you, I will honor this promise, I will repeat the important stuff over and over and over and over again until you want to scream. Now, here's what I want to talk about. Sort of divided into 2 halves. The first half, I want to tell you about some broad forces in the economy that are putting a premium on a very different approach to business, a very different approach to life, a very different set of abilities that are necessary to succeed in the 21st century. Then, I want to talk about the 6 particular abilities that matter most and how smart individuals and smart organizations are putting them into practice. And I want to get into this by confessing. I want to tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made, and that's going to launch us into this conversation. The biggest mistake I ever made occurred about 20 years ago, when in a moment of youthful indiscretion, I went to law school. Now, I did not do especially well in law school, to put it mildly. I, in fact, graduated in the part of my law school class that made the top 90% possible. Now, if I can digress here for a moment, it turned out that happily enough for me that law school, more than anything else I've done in my life, dramatically, profoundly, I would argue permanently increased my earning power. Because in law school, I met my wife. Otherwise, it was a total loss. Total loss. I didn't enjoy it. I graduated massively in debt. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't do well. I never practiced law a day in my life. If I could press the rewind button and live that part of my life over again, I would in a second. Which, of course, raises a question, which I'm going to toss over to you, which is this. Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Anybody have an answer? Society? Close? Parents. Exactly. It turns out that this horrific decision, like so many negative things in life, is actually my parents' fault. But let me explain what I mean by that. When I was a kid, and I grew up in the Midwest, Columbus, Ohio, grew up in the early 1970s, middle-class family, middle of America. When I was a kid, parents like mine dished out the same basic plate of advice to their children. Many of you probably were on the receiving end of this advice. Some of you might have been on the dispensing end of this advice. And the advice went like this: get good grades, go to college, pursue a profession that would give you some amount of economic security, and maybe a smidgen of prestige. So what did that mean in practice? That meant that if you were, as I was, as my wife was, reasonably good at subjects like English and history, go to law school. Let's say you're better at math and science. What do? Go to medical school or get an engineering degree. And even in that economy, okay, which is the early 1970s, okay, before globalization, before the internet, even in that very buoyant economy, if blood grossed you out, your verbal skills were a little shaky, you could still go and get a job as an accountant. But if you think about, let's think about those professions for a moment. One accountant just walked out of the room. Well, if you think about those professions for a moment, okay, think about those professions. Accountants and lawyers and engineers, but more important than that, think about the abilities. This is the key here. The abilities at the heart of those professions. Those were the abilities that mattered most. Those were the abilities that got you ahead in your career. Those were the abilities that organizations were demanding. Those were the abilities that, in some sense, even fueled the entire macroeconomy. Well, my argument is that those abilities still matter, but they matter less. Those engineer abilities, those lawyer abilities, those accountant abilities, they still matter, but they matter less. And a different set of abilities matters more. And there's a way that I've chosen to explain this. Now, I'm a writer, and one of the ways that people like to torture writers, and there are many, is to tell them that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But good writers, and I would argue good business people, know that while a picture is worth 1,000 words, sometimes a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but a metaphor is often worth 1,000 pictures. And I think that there is a metaphor that explains what's going on in the economy, in careers, in business today. And the metaphor is this. This is a brain, a human brain, a model of a human brain. Same size and weight of a brain. See, it sort of fits right here. Now, tempted as I am to give you a little mini lecture on neuroanatomy, I'll resist, and instead point you to probably the main, most distinguishing topographical feature of this brain, of your brain, of my brain, of everybody's brain. Running down the center of this brain, you see right here, is a Mason-Dixon line, cleaving this brain into two equal halves, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Now, many of you have probably heard about left brain this and right brain that over the years, and a lot of what you've heard is garbage. This is one of those ideas where the popularization of the idea has galloped far ahead of the science behind it. But in the last 5 years especially, the science has caught up, and we know, thanks to functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI's brain scans, we know an enormous amount about how our brains are organized. We're barely beginning to understand our brains, they're so complex, but we do have a sense at a very broad level of how our brains are organized. And there is, it turns out, this very elegant, very efficient division of labor in our brains. Our brains have different departments that carry out different functions. The left hemisphere deals with tasks that are logical, linear, sequential, analytical. Okay, make sense? This side of the brain, the right hemisphere of the brain, not better, not worse, just a different department. It deals with tasks that are more artistic, more empathic, more about synthesis rather than analysis, more about the big picture, more about context rather than text. There you have it. 50 years of neuroscience in 60 seconds. Now, here's where the metaphor comes in. It used to be that these abilities mattered most. The logical, linear, sequential, analytical, SAT, spreadsheet, zero in on the right answer abilities. These were the ones, metaphorically, that used to matter the most. And today, and I want to underscore this right now, today these abilities are still absolutely 100% necessary. Okay, let me say that again. Absolutely 100% necessary. But, no longer sufficient. And these abilities, okay, and these abilities characteristic of the right hemisphere of the brain, artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking, these abilities are now the first among equals. These abilities are the ones that matter most. That's the punchline. Now, you offer up this argument, and you often get a bipolar response. Okay? On one pole are artists and designers who think this is all pretty cool and nifty. They think it makes perfect intuitive sense. Okay? On the other pole, you have engineers, or accountants, or worse, lawyers, who think that this is, and this is not the exact language they use, a bunch of hooey. Okay? What's really important to understand here is that what I'm saying here, this tilt from the left brain thinking to right brain thinking, is not some kind of fantasy, is not some kind of yearning, it's not some kind of wish. Wouldn't it be lovely if we had an economy built less on these cold, hard, analytic abilities and more on artistry and empathy, and we could all link arms and frolic through the daisies? No, 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 no. The truth of the matter is that I am myself a very, very left-brain guy. I'm very analytical, I'm very numerate, I'm the most sequential person you've ever met in your life. I cannot multitask to save my life. In my hierarchy of loves, I've got my wife and our 3 children, number 1. And number 2 in my hierarchy of loves are charts and graphs. I love charts and graphs. If I want to explain something to someone, I'm going to draw you a chart. Okay? But over the last couple of years, I have taken a very hard, very analytical, very left-brain look at the evidence, at the facts, at the data, crunched the numbers, looked hard at what's really going on in organizations, in individual careers, and in the macroeconomy. Brought to bear the fiercest kind of analytic reasoning that I could muster, enlisted other analytic minds on the task to really look hard and crunch the numbers and look at the evidence and take apart the data. And after doing that, I don't even think it's close that the scales are tilting, and that people like me have a lot of catching up to do. But I want to make this argument for you over the next few minutes because I think it gives you the context of how your career is progressing, how your organization is moving. So I'm going to make an argument here in public, despite my law school performance, okay? It's a cause and effect, linear argument. The effect is that the scales are tilting, making the left brain abilities necessary no longer sufficient, the right brain abilities the first among equals, and the causes are threefold. They are abundance, Asia, and automation. Abundance. You're laughing at this. It took me 4 months to get them all to start with A, okay? Abundance, Asia, automation. Let's start with abundance. Now, what I'm going to say here is somewhat politically incorrect, but I will say it anyway. The United States of America is doing very, very well. Very well. Deep into the middle class, this country has a standard of living that is breathtaking by historic standards and international standards. Now, we have a problem in this country with poverty. We've got 12% of our country living in poverty. We've got 10% worried they're going to fall through the trap door into poverty. That's a moral disgrace on its own terms. But it's a double disgrace, a triple disgrace, a quadruple disgrace when you look at how well off the rest of the country is. If you look at the data, this country is doing spectacularly well. Let me give you a few examples. Let's take automobiles, okay? My grandparents, when they were my age, an automobile was essentially a rich person's toy, a luxury item. You know how many automobiles there are today? A lot, right. A lot. Here, let's do an audience poll. I want you to raise one hand for every car you own. If you own 1 car, raise 1 hand. If you own 2 cars, raise 2 hands. If you own 3 cars, stand up. Okay, how many cars do you own? Okay, look at this audience. This audience reflects what's going on in the United States, okay? Today in the United States, there are more automobiles than there are licensed drivers. There's a greater than 1-to-1 ratio between cars and people eligible to drive them. That's what I mean by abundance. Okay, let's do this is fun. Let's do another audience poll. How many of you have something in self-storage? What do you have in self-storage?
A lot of business literature.
A lot of business literature. Okay, so remaindered copies of my books, like that kind of thing? What do you have in self-storage?
Extra stuff.
Extra stuff. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. What's in self-storage, okay? Self-storage is an industry built on extra stuff. Now, that's interesting in its own right, okay? But let's look at this analytically, okay? Like I do, okay? What has happened? Let's look at some trend lines. What's happened to the size of the typical American dwelling over the last 50 years? Bigger, right? What's happened to the size of the typical American household over the last 50 years? Smaller. Class, what does that net out to? More space per person. In fact, I'm the only person in America who's gone back and actually looked at these numbers and crunched the data. I could only get clean data sets to 1974. Since 1974, in this country, there has been a 65% increase in residential space per capita. That's pretty amazing. Let's go back to our self-storage industry. So we got bigger houses, fewer people living in them, but a whole industry has emerged to house our extra stuff. I don't know if any of you are history buffs, but I wonder, do you think there was a self-storage industry during the Great Depression? No, it would have been preposterous. Today in America, the self-storage industry is a $17 billion a year business. It is larger than the motion picture business. There are more self-storage facilities in the United States than there are McDonald's restaurants, Wendy's restaurants, and Burger King restaurants combined. That's what I mean by that's what I mean by abundance. Now, abundance, remember, we're making an argument here. Abundance has two consequences for this tilt from left to right. Here's the first set of consequences. What's this? Very good. What kind of toilet brush?
A designer.
A designer toilet brush. This is a toilet brush designed by Michael Graves, one of the greatest product designers and architects of our time. In fact, he's so proud of this toilet brush that he has etched his signature here on the handle. Okay? So this is a signed designer toilet brush. That's what don't laugh at this. There's a serious economic point here. That's what happens in a world of abundance, okay? Suppose you're in the toilet. Don't laugh at this. There's a serious economic point. Suppose you're in the toilet brush business, okay? You want to sell toilet brushes. You face a threshold challenge if you want to sell more toilet brushes. What is that threshold challenge? The challenge you face is that in this country, we have pretty much cracked the engineering side of the toilet brush challenge, okay? We figured out how to make a toilet brush that more or less scrubs the bowl. So if you want to sell more toilet brushes, what do? Well, you either make a dramatic leap in toilet brush technology, which no one has done, or that leaves you, if you don't do that, you have two options. Compete on price. We don't like that. That's a downward death spiral. Or you compete not on these left brain features, functionality, but on these right brain features. You come out with a cool shade of blue. You come out with a nifty handle. You link it to other kinds of housewares. Even though, in a world of abundance, even the most mundane, utilitarian products, services, and experiences have become objects of desire, because that's how you stand out in a crowded marketplace. Let's go to another example. What's this? But not just any fly swatter, right? What kind of fly swatter? A three-legged fly swatter. But that's actually a very important point, which we'll get to in a moment. That's a very good, keen eye. This is a designer fly swatter, a Philippe Starck fly swatter, okay? Designed by one of the great French designers. Now, if you were to take a design class, you would learn something on day one. The professor would come before you and say, class, design is a combination of utility and significance. Make sense? Utility and significance. Utility, it has to work. Significance, it has to have some other kind of attribute. Okay? This fly swatter has utility. If there were a fly here, I could swat it, kill it, put it in my self-storage locker. But think about, let's anthropomorphize this fly swatter for a moment. Think about this fly swatter's life. How much does it spend in utility? Very little. It spends more of its life in significance, and that's where your point comes in. That's why the ingenious move here is to equip it with a pedestal. So it can hang out and be significant. Now, again, I'm a left-brain guy, so this significant stuff I don't quite get. I can sort of get it intellectually. Here's what I do care about. Math and money, okay? Let's talk about those two things. How much do you think the plastic in that fly swatter is worth? 2 cents? Penny? How much does this retail for, do you think? $5. $5? Higher. $9.99? Higher. $14. Okay? Let's say, I'm going to save you from getting an MBA, because here's what you learn. Class, selling 3 cents of plastic for $14, those are what we call margins. Here's the point. Increasingly, in a world of abundance, you get your margins out of significance rather than utility. Okay? This fly swatter costs $14, not because it's the most utilitarian fly swatter, but because it's the most significant. You get your margins out of significance rather than utility. That's one way abundance tilts the scales. The other way is more interesting, I think, because I can render it as a chart. Now I get to put up a chart. Here's a chart. On this axis is more and less, and this axis is time. Here's what's happened to American per capita GDP over the last 50 years. Threefold increase in prosperity. Now, you would think that a country that gets richer and richer and richer gets happier and happier and happier, right? No, you wouldn't think that, because that would not be an interesting chart. There's a lot of data out of the University of Michigan that measures levels of satisfaction, asking people in countries around the world, are you satisfied with your life? Are you satisfied with the way things are going? Are you happy? Measures of subjective well-being. Here's what the trend line looks like during this period when per capita GDP has tripled. It's flat. We've gotten 3 times richer, but not 1 jot happier. That's very, very interesting. And this gap here, what I call the abundance gap, explains a huge amount of what's going on in this country. It explains why the best-selling nonfiction book of the last 8 years is The Purpose-Driven Life, about how to lead a life of purpose and meaning and significance. It explains why you have 10 million Americans meditating, why you have 15 million Americans doing yoga, why these once fringy, meaning-centered, transcendence-centered things are moving into mainstream society. We have been liberated by prosperity, but not fulfilled by it, and so you have this widespread democratization of the search for meaning. There's widespread democratization of self-realization, self-actualization. All these touchy-feely things that we used to think were kind of luxuries for the very well-off have become a middle-class phenomenon. This is a big, big deal. It might be the biggest thing going on in this country today. This explains why Oprah is a cultural phenomenon, because she's about living your best life. This explains why my two grandfathers would be aghast that they have grandchildren who quit jobs because they're not meaningful enough. Okay? Oh, it's not really a true expression of myself, Grandpa. You know? They would be appalled by that. But if you ever hire anybody, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for meaning. This is really unprecedented, and here's the thing. It's not going away. Why isn't it going away? 2 words. Boomers. I guess that's 1 word. Boomers. Baby boomers. 2 words. 2 words. First baby boomers start turning 60 in 2006. Okay? What happens when a baby boomer turns 60? Here's what happens. 2 things. 1, first they ask themselves, how the heck did I get to be 60? Second, for one brief shining moment, they begin to reckon with their own mortality. They say, 60, that's not old anymore. But it might mean that I'm mortal. It might mean that my life is not infinite. I might have, say, 25 years left. Okay? Seems like a long time. Then they look back 25 years to when they're 35. And they say, holy smokes, that sure happened fast. Are these next 25 years going to happen as fast? And if they are, when am I going to lead a purpose-driven life? When am I going to do something that matters? When am I going to lead a life of meaning? When am I going to leave a legacy? When am I going to live my best life? Now, it's all very touchy-feely, right? But this is going on at a scale, and this is not hyperbole, that is unprecedented in human civilization. Unprecedented in human civilization. 7,900 baby boomers turn 60 every day. Every day. That means that, again, I love math, okay? That means that you have 100 baby boomers turning 60 every 18 minutes. Every 18 minutes, you got another 100 folks who are thinking about this, another 100 folks who are thinking about how to live their best life. Every 18 minutes, 100 people will turn 60, and this will go on for the next 18 years. That's a big deal. But it's not about this left brain, get me the right answer stuff. It's about meaning and purpose and significance. Okay, we're making an argument here. Abundance, Asia, automation tilting the scales. Let's go to Asia. Here are 6 people I met in Mumbai, India, not too long ago. All of them do work for North American companies. Some Canadian companies, several American companies, 1 German company. All of them do work that you get paid maybe $60,000, $65,000 a year for in the United States. None of these people who have degrees in computer science and engineering makes more than $15,000 a year. You've all heard about offshoring and outsourcing. Let me tell you what I think you need to know about offshoring and outsourcing and its effect on your career and your business. Offshoring, massively, massively, massively overhyped in the short term. Massively overhyped in the short term. The number of jobs lost to offshoring so far, in the grand scheme of things, has been relatively small. Fewer than the typical turnover in a single month in American labor markets. Okay? Short term, impact hasn't been great. Overhyped in the short term. But, offshoring, I hate to break it to you, is actually underhyped in the long term. It's underhyped in the long term. And the reason I say that is not because I like hyperbole, not because I like to stoke fear in my fellow citizens. It's because I can do math. I want to stack up 3 numbers for you to show you what I mean. First number begins with this. India, and I'm using India as the embodiment of Asia only because I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time there, and I think it's one of the most exciting places on earth right now. India has an advantage in the global economy. India is very big, okay? India has 1 billion people, okay? Now, for those of you who are liberal arts majors in college, 1 billion is a very large number, okay? What do we know about large numbers? We know about the statistical principle called the law of large numbers, which states if you take a small percentage of a very, very large number, you get another large number. So, let's say that 15% of India's population makes it to this status, okay? 15%, meaning 85% basically get left behind from this way of living, okay? 15% of 1 billion is 150 million. 150 million. You know how large the entire U.S. workforce is? 150 million. So, if 85% of India's population gets left behind, you've got as many upper middle class, talented, well-educated, ambitious Indians as you have workers in a $12 trillion economy. That's number 1. 150. That's the first number. India is going to be the largest English-speaking country on the planet. When? 2010. The United States of America in 4 years is not going to be the largest English-speaking country in the world. That's a remarkable thing. I didn't think that would happen in my lifetime. Okay? Now, let's talk about money and math, my 2 favorite subjects. What is the cost of communication between the United States, North America, and India? What's the trend line look like, up or down? The cost of communication between the United States and India. Down. You want to see how far down? It's so far down. The trend line is circular, actually. It's 0. Okay? So, let's stack this up. Okay? We're just doing math here. Let's stack this up. 150 million upper middle class people speak perfect English, connected to North America for free. Okay, that might have an effect. And here's the effect that it's going to have. And if you remember nothing else here, I would like you to remember one word, particularly if you have children. These facts have made one word the most dangerous word in the economy. They have made one word a vocational death sentence. They've made one word a word that will obliterate your career, obliterate your business. I'm going to share you this word. Share this word with you if you can take it. The scariest word. I want you to know this word. I want your kids to know this word. In fact, I want your kids to write it on their notebooks, look at it each morning, and run screaming in the other direction. That's how terrifying this word is. Routine. Routine. Any kind of routine work is going to disappear from this country, period. What do I mean by routine work? Routine work is any work you can reduce to a script, to a spec sheet, to a formula, to a set of rules, to a series of steps that produces a right answer. Okay? That's what I mean by routine work. And you know what? That's the kind of work that used to get you into the middle class. Certain kinds of financial analysis, certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of legal work, okay? That kind of work, anything that is routine, where you can write down the steps and delivers a right answer, that kind of work is gone. It is going to disappear from this country, period. Some of it's gone. The rest of it's going to follow over the next several years. We've seen this movie before. This is what happened to mass production work. The United States still does plenty of mass production work, plenty of manufacturing. We've got the largest manufacturing economy in the world. We just got so good at it, we do it with fewer people. And the work gets increasingly sophisticated. A factory floor today has robots, computers, people with associate's degrees, because all the routine blue-collar work has gone. The routine white-collar work is following its way out. Now, class, let's go back to our metaphor. Which side of the brain is routine? Step by step, okay, left. So, you ship this to India, okay, bye. What are you left with?
Half a brain.
Half a brain. But the important half now. Okay, that is Asia. Now, let's go to automation, okay? It's the same story, okay? We've seen this movie before, too. Last century, machines replaced human back, human muscle. This century, software is replacing the human brain. But let's go to it again. What part of the brain can software replace? Exactly. Not the artistic empathic side, the logical, linear, rule-based, get me the right answer side. So now you see certain kinds of white-collar professions at risk of automation in a way that we haven't seen before. Give you an example. My parents told me to go to law school, even if I didn't want to be a lawyer, because they said, Danny, still call me Danny into my 40s, Danny, we won't talk about that, Danny, you got to go to law school because it's something to fall back on. Okay, classic middle-class phrase. I'm not sure anymore. I want to give you a delicious example of how even law can be automated. Let's say you want to get an I'm in Washington, D.C., and I want to stipulate here that I'm very happily married. Let's say you live in Washington, D.C. and want to get an uncontested divorce. Okay? You go to a lawyer to get an uncontested divorce in Washington, D.C., and it's going to cost you about $2,000. But an uncontested divorce is not very complicated, is it? It's uncontested, right? No one, they just want to get away from each other. So what does a lawyer in an uncontested divorce actually do? Think about what a lawyer in an uncontested divorce actually does. First, he or she tries to make it contested, okay? But assuming he or she can't do that, they fill out forms, right? We could do a little bit of research, and in 20 minutes, in this audience right here, find exactly what it is a lawyer in the District of Columbia did to get somebody an uncontested divorce. We could list the steps. That makes it the R word. What happens to the R word? It gets offshored or it gets automated. So now in this great country, you have a choice. You can go to that lawyer for $2,000, or you can go to completecase.com for affordable divorce solutions. Couple people in the back writing down that URL right now. What happens at completecase.com? Here's what happens at completecase.com. You go to the website, you pull down the menu, you pick your state, you check the residency requirements, you go to the form. You fill it out yourself. They then transmit the form electronically to a lawyer, because state bar regulations require a lawyer to actually, bless the document, okay? So they ship it electronically to a lawyer who blesses the document. I bless thee, okay? They pay that lawyer $50. The one guy who did worse than I did in law school, that's actually his job. Lawyer blesses the document, they ship it off to the courthouse, and you've got yourself a divorce, not for $2,000, not for $1,500, not for $1,000, not for $500, but for $249. Now, think about that. Think about being the lawyer doing the routine uncontested divorce. You've got a competitor coming in. They're not charging $1,800 or $1,750. They're coming in and saying, I'm going to do the exact same thing faster for 85% less. That's a big deal. You see it now in its incipient stages with medical diagnosis, because medical diagnosis is about following decision trees that bracket to yes-no questions. You see it also with our friends the accountants, okay? We had a large number of U.S. tax returns done in India because an Indian chartered accountant makes $500 a month. Well, you had 21 million Americans who did their taxes on TurboTax, on a piece of software. This is the accountant job killer right here. 21 million Americans did their taxes on a $39.95 piece of software rather than go to an accountant. Because certain kinds of accounting is routine, logical, linear, step-by-step. So we add these all up, abundance, Asia, automation, and it's tilting the scales. The left brain abilities are necessary but no longer sufficient. The right brain abilities have become the first among equals. Now, in that kind of setting, you need to look very hard at what you're doing and ask yourself these three questions. These three questions. Can someone overseas do it cheaper? Can a computer do it faster? And is what you're selling in demand in an age of abundance? That is what you're selling have significance? That's the whole ball game right here, folks. That's the whole ball game right here. Now, what doesn't pass this test? Certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of financial analysis, certain kinds of law, certain kinds of things our parents told us to do. What does pass this test? Designers, artists, nurses, teachers, inventors, entrepreneurs, people who are multifaceted. Those are the abilities that are really going to matter the most. What matters, we tend to obsess over high-tech abilities, but and I'm old enough to remember when people on the resume would put that they had computer skills, okay? It seems kind of silly now. I've got a 9-year-old daughter with computer skills, okay? Don't tell me about computer skills. What matters more than these high-tech abilities are abilities that are high concept and high touch. Hard to outsource, hard to automate, and that deliver significance. Economies used to be about routines and right answers. Not anymore. Okay? Routines and right answers you can outsource and automate. They're basically become commodities. What matters more is novelty and nuance. This is what most of you in this audience do for a living, is novelty and nuance, not routines and right answers. Now, I'm going to leave aside the fact that our schools are just maniacally, pathologically obsessed with routines and right answers. It's another story altogether. But this is what the economy is about now. Novelty and nuance, more right brain kind of capacities. Now, I want to take a few moments to talk about the 6 abilities that matter most. The 6 abilities that matter most. The 6 abilities that matter most begin with design. Go back to our fly swatter. Go back to our toilet brush. Design has become a fundamental business literacy. In business today, you must be literate in design, period. You don't have to be a great designer. You must be literate in design. It's that important. I want to show you 2 examples of how much it's taken hold in business. Let's take General Motors. General Motors having some tough times. General Motors lost a lot of money last year. And they had a shareholders meeting. And when shareholders lose a few $1 billion, they're generally not that happy. A fellow named Bob Lutz, who is a 70-year-old white man with white hair, former fighter pilot, takes a helicopter to work, not a touchy-feely dude. He got up before this group of disgruntled shareholders, and here's what he said about how to turn around General Motors. What we've got at GM now, Mr. Lutz said, is a general comprehension that you can't run this business by the left, intellectual, analytical side of the brain. You have to have a lot of right side, creative input. We are in the arts and entertainment business. We are in the arts and entertainment business. We are in the arts and entertainment business, and we're putting a huge emphasis on world-class design. Hello? General Motors is in the art and entertainment business? How the heck did that happen? We got more cars than people. Okay? You can find a way to get from point A to point B. So Mr. Lutz is talking about cars as a form of mobile sculpture. He's hiring sculptors as much as engineers. Okay? When General Motors is in the art business, we're all in the art business. Let me give you another example. Here's the CEO. The CEO. Okay, that's a pretty important job in a Fortune 15 company. The CEO of Procter & Gamble, who says, remember what Procter & Gamble does. It's a fabulous company, but think about what Procter & Gamble makes. Okay? It makes powder you put in your washing machine. It's one of the things that it makes. Here's what the CEO says. Not some renegade in the design department. He says, I don't think anybody thinks we're not seriously in the design business. We want to design the purchasing experience. We want to design the communication experience and the user experience. I mean, it's all design. Says the CEO of Procter & Gamble, because he recognizes that design is the antidote to commodification. This is why I like to tell people that the MFA, the Masters of Fine Art, is the new MBA. These MBA skills you can outsource and automate. MFA skills, harder to outsource, harder to automate, in big demand in an age where design is an important distinguishing factor in products and services and businesses. Not just argument, but also story. Here's why story matters. Story matters because of the internet. Let me give you a scenario here. Suppose it's 1991, and I decide to have a contest. The contest is one question. The question is this. I want to know the gross domestic product of Ecuador last year. It's 1991, and I have 2 contestants in this contest. One of them is the head librarian of Cambridge University in the UK. The other one is a 30-year-old woman in Tanzania. It's 1991. We have a one-question contest. I want to know the gross domestic product of Ecuador last year. Ready, set, go. Who do you think is going to win? The librarian. It's 1991. Cut, fade out. Let's go to 2006. That 30-year-old woman now has a 14-year-old daughter. Okay? We're going to have the same contest. Head librarian at Cambridge, same guy. They don't change jobs. Same guy. Versus the 14-year-old daughter. Only this time, the 14-year-old daughter has a high-speed internet connection. So we have a race. Who can find out the gross domestic product of Ecuador the fastest? A race between the head librarian of Cambridge University and the 14-year-old girl in Tanzania. Who are you going to bet on? Hey, it's a fair fight now. Now that's a remarkable thing. That a 14-year-old girl in Tanzania can find facts as fast as the head librarian of one of the greatest universities on the planet. That's a big deal, guys. Here's what it means. Facts have become ubiquitous. Facts have become free. Therefore, okay, economics 101, something that is free doesn't have enormous economic value, right? What matters more in this world of ubiquitous, easily discovered facts is putting facts in context and delivering them with emotional impact. That's what a story does. So you now see story moving into a range of business functions, into knowledge management, into leadership, and also into differentiation in the marketplace. I want to give you one really interesting example of this. The use of story as a differentiator in a crowded marketplace is where design was 10 or 12 years ago. If Mr. Lafley had said 10 or 12 years ago that his company, Procter & Gamble, it's all design, the board would have had a meeting, okay? Gotten some medical tests for him, shipped him out, okay? It would have seen this freaky notion, okay? Now everyone's like, yeah, of course. A story, I think, is where design was 10 or 12 years ago. It is about to break through the surface as a hugely important differentiator in a very crowded marketplace. I'm going to give you an example from my own consumer life about the importance of story as a product differentiator. I've got 3 children with a combined age of 19. When you have 3 children with a combined age of 19, strange things can happen in your household. Like one morning, I come downstairs to the kitchen, and the cordless phone that usually hangs on the wall is no longer hanging on the wall, but it is on the floor in pieces. No one knows how it happened. I admire the sibling solidarity a little, but what it means is that I have to go to the store. So I go to a major electronics retailer, walk into this giant big box electronics retailer to find a cordless phone. The doors swing open. I get hit by that wall of stuff. I stagger my way to the cordless phone section. I look for a cordless phone. There are 83 kinds of cordless phone. Abundance, right? So I'm shaking my head. I don't want to spend my Saturday looking for a phone. I say, oh, design has become a fundamental business literacy. I'm going to get me a phone that combines utility and significance. I'm going to get me a cool-looking cordless phone. 60 of them are fairly cool-looking. So I finally get a phone that has a modest number of features, right price, race out of the store. And until I started thinking about this, I didn't know what brand phone I'd bought. Cut, fade out. 2 weeks later, I'm in a food retailer picking up some dinner for my family. And because I have 3 children with a combined age of 19, I'm also picking up several bottles of wine. I go to the wine section. I'm a cheap guy. I want a $10 bottle of wine. Huge numbers of bottles of wine. I finally go to at the bottom where they have the cheap wine, because some people, not me, apparently are chagrined about getting on their knees looking for a bargain. Not me. I find 3 bottles of wine in the $10 price range, collect the bottles to look at them. I look at the first bottle. It says on the back, it has all of those fancy wine adjectives. You know, this wine has a sarcastic nose, okay? And I don't even know what that means. So I go to the next bottle, and it's this very elaborate description of the process by which the wine was made, the temperature at which it was kept, the kind of barrels it was in. It sounds good, but I'm not a chemical engineer, so I don't understand what that means either. Then I go to the third bottle of wine. This bottle of wine. 2 brothers, big tattoo, red. I look at the label. I don't get adjectives. I don't get fermentation processes. I get a story. Here's what it says. This wine comes from 2 brothers, Alex, a wine importer, and Eric, a tattoo artist. Together, they created Big Tattoo Red in honor of their mother, Liliana, who passed away from cancer in 2000. Alex created the blend, and Eric designed the label using Liliana's favorite symbol, the fleur-de-lis. For every bottle sold, the brothers donate 50 cents to the Hospice of Northern Virginia and other breast cancer-related charities in the name of Liliana S. Barthelmess. The debut 2001 vintage allowed donations of $83,000. 2002 was over $240,000. With your help, we expect to surpass $250,000 for the 2003 vintage. Alex and Eric, thank you for your support and for honoring their mother. Okay, which wine are you going to buy? Okay, now, here's the thing. If the wine weren't any good, you wouldn't buy it again. But you know what? It's perfectly fine. And I bought it again and again and again. And obviously, I've fallen into the Barthelmess Brothers' insidious marketing trap by telling you about it as well. The point is that the backstories of products, services, and experiences are now a very important differentiator. You see this in a range of industries. It is where design was 10 or 12 years ago, about to shoot through the surface. Let's go to the third one, symphony. Not just focus, but also symphony. We tend in business to obsess over focus, when in fact, sometimes the opposite ability is the most important. In fact, often, the opposite ability is the most important. I call that ability symphony, which is the ability to see the big picture, to detect patterns, to combine disparate things into something the world didn't know it was missing. There's a very interesting example of how powerful this can be. Self-made millionaires, it turns out, are 4 times as likely to be dyslexic as the rest of the population. Now, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? One possibility is that because they have difficulty with some of the left brain functioning, particularly the sequential functioning, what happens if you have difficulty doing that? You overcompensate. Okay, so some dyslexics, not all, develop almost a hyper-muscled ability in this kind of stuff. Okay? If this stuff is difficult for you, you overcompensate in the way that someone who is blind develops a more acute sense of hearing. So they often, not always, develop a hyper-muscled capability on this side. Not because they're trying to get a job in the 21st century labor market, because they're trying to friggin' get through the day. They're trying to survive, right? So the list of game-changing entrepreneurs who are dyslexic is unbelievable. Charles Schwab is dyslexic, the founder of IKEA, okay, who is the richest man in the world, depending on currency valuations, is dyslexic. One female real estate mogul in New York, Barbara Corcoran, she's dyslexic. Founder of JetBlue, David Neeleman, he's dyslexic. Virgin is a pretty successful company in a range of industries, Richard Branson, dyslexic. On and on and on it goes. Because this ability, in many ways, is a killer app, and it's hard to outsource, and it's hard to automate. Now, how do you get better at this? How do you get better at this? Well, one way is to learn how to draw. Artists understand this ability. Artists know about symphonic thinking. Artists can see the big picture, they can make new combinations, they can detect the pattern. So I decided to test this proposition and learn how to draw myself. Having taken no fine arts classes in high school, no fine arts classes in college, no fine arts classes as an adult. Very well-rounded guy that I am. But I decided to learn how to draw. So I took a 5-day course in New York City called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, modeled after the famous book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, and taught by the author's son. On day 1, we were asked to draw our self-portrait. And here's mine. Okay, that's not very good, is it, class? Why isn't it very good? Well, check out these lips. Okay, I might as well have written L-I-P-S, okay? Because nobody's lips look like that. That's basically a symbol for lips, okay? How about this chin, a single semicircle, okay? I don't have a little line here that signifies my chin, and we're not going to talk about my unresolved nostril issues either, okay? So, the reason this isn't very good is not because I couldn't draw, although that was a little bit of it. It was because I couldn't see. So over the next 5 days, I started learning about things I never knew about. I feel like an ignoramus now, and many of you will think that I am if you have any kind of artistic background. I learned about proportions, about relationships, about light and shadow, about something called negative space, which is the space between spaces. Okay, the space between spaces. So in this D, this little spot right here is negative space. Okay? Suddenly the scales are falling off my eyes. Wow, what an interesting world we live in now that I can actually see it. On day 5, we had to draw our self-portrait. Here's mine. Now, that's not great. Okay? And I got a little Picasso thing going on with the eyes here. But let's pretend we're at the optometrist. Okay? Better 1 or 2? Better 1 or 2? If I can do that, you can imagine what kind of unliberated symphonic capacity there is in yourself and in others. There's a very prominent negative space in this corporate logo. I'm obsessed with negative spaces right now. See this right here? This is a negative space in here. There's a very prominent negative space here that some of you might not have seen. Does everybody see the arrow? Start looking for negative space, and you'll be amazed at what you see. Not just logic, but also empathy. Empathy makes the world better. Standing in someone else's shoes, feeling with their heart, seeing with their eyes, it makes the world a better place. That's nice. Here's what I care about empathy. You can't outsource it, and you can't automate it. That's what makes it important. So it's important in sales, it's important in medicine, it's important in design, it's important in a range of professions. There's a study out of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia has a medical school called the Jefferson School of Medicine. They have established what's called the JSPE, the Jefferson Scale of Physician Empathy. There's something very interesting here. Very interesting here. Measures on this empathy index correlate well with patient outcomes. The more empathic your doctor is, the more likely you are to get better faster. Now, what doesn't correlate with patient outcomes? MCAT scores, board scores, that kind of thing. It's not a negative correlation, it's just there's no correlation. That empathy saves hospitals money, gets patients better fast. Now, there's some other curious things on this. Generalists score better than specialists on this. That's symphony. Nurses score better than physicians, probably because they spend more time with patients. And here's a shocker. Women score better than men. So you see empathy moving into sales as well. Good salespeople test off the charts. Empathy has become extraordinarily important because it's one of the few remaining abilities you can't outsource and can't automate. Not just seriousness, but also play. By play, I mean sense of humor, laughter, spirit of playfulness, and even games. Okay? Video games obviously are hugely important culturally. I don't think people over 35, including myself, understand that. I would like to see a reverse mentoring program in this country where everybody under 35 explains video games to everybody over 35, because you see a range of marketing and leadership efforts that are centered on simulation and games, so that it's not a frivolity. This is a photograph I took in India of a laughter club where people get together every morning and laugh for no reason. I took this picture about 6:30 in the morning, where 45 people had gotten together at a muddy soccer field in suburban Mumbai to laugh. These laughter clubs are started by a doctor who has a practice that he calls laughter yoga, because there's now basically inexorable evidence that laughter is good for you physiologically, psychologically. There are European companies that have laughter clubs in-house. There are 1,000 of these clubs in India. There are 1,000 more now in the United States, because laughter is cheap and valuable. Finally, not just accumulation, but also meaning. Okay? I am convinced that meaning is moving to the center of every successful business, certainly every successful career. Let me give you one quick example of this. I want to show you a quotation from a fellow named John Mackey, who's the CEO of Whole Foods. This is a remarkable statement. He says, "Making high profits is the means to the end of fulfilling Whole Foods' core business mission. We want to improve the health and well-being of everyone on the planet through higher quality foods and better nutrition, and we can't fulfill this mission unless we are highly profitable. Just as people cannot live without eating, so a business cannot live without profits, but most people don't live to eat, and neither must a business live just to make profits." Now that's a remarkable statement from the CEO of a publicly held company, downplaying the importance of profits. I mean, to me, it strikes my ear as vaguely communistic. Okay? Whole Foods has a $9 million market cap. Whole Foods is the fastest growing grocery chain in America. Whole Foods has entered a really terrible business, retail grocery, where the margins are as thin as, you know, the shaved ham, okay? And they have managed to make a big difference by emphasizing meaning and a big, audacious mission. This is not some kind of anodyne, antiseptic corporate mission about satisfying stakeholders or being proactive. They're saying their business mission is to improve the health and well-being of everyone on the planet. It is big, it is bold, it is audacious, it is public-spirited. Those are how the top-performing companies are operating, how they're talking. Here's what I think is going on. We know about for-profit companies. We know about not-for-profit organizations. I think the best companies, the best-performing companies today are not only for-profit companies. They're companies that make money. They delight in making money. They make profits. They satisfy their shareholders. They do all those things. But the avenue to getting there is doing something big and bold and audacious and public-spirited. These are companies that in some ways have linked purpose and profit. They want to do good, and they can do, and by doing good, they can do right by their employees and their executives and their shareholders. Let's wrap up. We'll review. What, class, are the three forces that are tilting the scales away from these left-brain abilities toward these right-brain abilities? They are
abundance, Asia, automation.
Whew. What's the scariest word?
Routine.
And finally, the six abilities that matter most are these: design, story, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. One last word, then I'm done. Some people might be daunted by these abilities. They might listen to the argument about the economy and say, "Dan, your logic is airtight, I'm thoroughly convinced, but if these are the abilities that matter most, I'm toast." I don't do this kind of stuff. I think you're wrong. I think we all do this kind of stuff. I think these abilities are fundamental human abilities. They're part of what it means to be human. It's just that in the information age, the SAT age, the spreadsheet age, these abilities were never called out of hiding. They weren't in demand, and they're like muscles that have atrophied. We simply need to work them back into shape. The final thing that I want to say about this, it should make us optimistic, is this. These are things people actually want to do. They are things people actually want to do. They are things you don't need to coerce people into doing. They are things people do out of a sense of intrinsic motivation. Think about it. This weekend, you will have an accountant who's in her backyard painting. A portrait, landscape, right? That's design. You'll have a lawyer who's in his home office writing a screenplay, writing a novel, right? That's story. You'll have an engineer in a routine job who's tinkering in the basement trying to invent something, symphony. You'll have another engineer in a routine job who's doing volunteer work at a church or a synagogue or a mosque. It's empathy, right? That makes perfect sense. But here's what won't go on this weekend. I guarantee it. This weekend or any weekend, you will not find someone who has a day job as a sculptor, who on weekends, for fun, is doing other people's taxes. The sorts of things we do out of a sense of intrinsic motivation, out of the joy and challenge of the task itself, are the things that are now conferring the greatest advantage in the economy. I think that's a pretty nifty world to live in. And I want to thank all of you for helping bring that world into being. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I think a great life is using your strengths, understanding what it is you were put on this earth to do. Okay? Understanding what it is that makes you unique and what allows and what is the truest expression of who you are. Doing that persistently in the service of something larger than yourself.